Welcome to the Amber Nectar podcast, discussing the things we think about Hull City AFC.
Welcome along to the Amber Nectar podcast. It's good to see you if you are joining us live on YouTube or on via our live streaming on Periscope as well. And of course you can get the audio only version via the SoundCloud page. 2 podcasts this week in 2 days. That is the plan, because tomorrow it's our 200th edition and we have a non-topical special on something regarding Hull City's history lined up for you with a special guest tomorrow evening. More on that later. Andy and Les are here, as you can see, or hear, as you're about to hear. 1 defeat in 13, which includes 9 wins, 3 draws, 6 straight victories, 10th in the table, 4 off the playoffs, vastly improving goal difference, the form goal scorer of the division, joint 3rd in the table. Hull City AFC.
Well, I got a funny little twinge when you were saying, running through those list of statistics there, Matt.
You were getting erect.
It's quite... it is getting that way, isn't it? It's getting to the point where sexball is the legitimate incarnation of Hull City, and wasn't it very sexual on Saturday to see City so ruthlessly go to town on the team? I love the 1 to 90 minute aspect of it as well. The fact that it wasn't a bit of a streaky win, or there was we had our moments and they had their moments. As soon as City kicked off, they were miles better than Sheffield Wednesday until the ref said, "Okay, that's enough of that now."
And yet it took until injury time in the first half to actually take the lead, Les. Did you get the sense, just before Jared Bowen scored that first goal, that it was going to be a frustrating afternoon where City completely dominated but didn't get the reward?
I did consider that it might be, and I was having a chat with our good friend JR about this, saying about how City had played lovely, really technically accomplished football in the first half, but we hadn't really done is punched them square in the face, and that was the only thing that was missing. And almost instantly, the Hertfordshire Iron Robin, not because of his hairline, but because he's a left-footed right winger who loves to cut in and then sort of bend the ball past the keeper, did that. And so that felt gratifying, because we were playing really lovely football, but we just sometimes didn't have an end product to it. We didn't really hurt them, with a shot. So to then see us do it, and then also see, the utter deflation of Sheffield Wednesday's sphincter at that point. They effectively gave up then, didn't they? I mean, it was really obvious. They're defending for Fraser Campbell's goal. One was like, whatever, go on. But it was fantastic. I mean, Sheffield Wednesday invited it. They defended so deep, and I don't understand what they thought they were going to get out of that. And City just thought, thanks. And so you had Grzycki running down one side, you had Bowen. There was all manner of mayhem. It was
a strange thing to do, wasn't it? For them to pretty much start time wasting from the off, as if they only wanted a goalless draw, or they thought that the only way to stop this black and amber juggernaut was to frustrate the hell out of it until somebody got a bit wild about it, left themselves out of position, and Sheffield Wednesday did something on the break. But it was a boneheaded idea, because it just invited an extremely confident side to show even more confidence.
Well, if you start time wasting in the 5th minute, which is exactly what Sheffield Wednesday's keeper did, it just sends out such a message of subservience, doesn't it? And what does the 10 seconds that he manages to tick by do? Does it benefit the fact that you're communicating an obvious message of fear? No, of course it doesn't. When City see a keeper time wasting that early, and they see Sheffield Wednesday dropping that deep, you're psychologically emboldened, aren't you, when that sort of thing happens?
It was an amazing one-sided affair against us. I mean, putting aside the mick that we take out of their supporters because of their alleged numbers, it is a big win because it's against a genuine giant of the Championship with a serious history of success in football. One that's had long time pretensions to try and get back into the Premier League. It's actually been quite fun to have blooded the nose of 2 massive Yorkshire clubs in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and not just beaten them conclusively on the pitch without conceding a goal to either, incidentally, but also seriously annoying their supporters.
Yeah, it was absolutely great to score 3 goals, equaling how many million fans they've got. What's been really interesting about that is you've essentially had Leeds United fans and Sheffield United fans crying on each shoulder on Twitter, on social media, sort of having to sort of form like Voltron to try and do the, but you're a small club, you're a tin pot, you don't have many funds. You know, the defence, rather than just admit to the fact, well, your side just looked worse than ordinary because City just took them to pieces. Brilliant. Let them bang on about the empty seats at Wembley. Do you honestly think the type of people that are at a run-of-the-mill championship game wouldn't have been at Wembley? That's a stupid thing to shout in the first place. But it's amazing how many quiet millions of people can be, isn't it?
It's also surprising just how boneheaded they can be in some of their offerings. When you're singing "Where Were You at Wembley?" Well, where were you 10 minutes after the match finished at Wembley? Because you couldn't wait to get back up the M1. We were still having a real good time.
Where were you after 70 minutes on Saturday? Because that was some impressive, migration towards the exit. Lovely stuff.
Absolutely. Comparison with 2008 is now quite eerie, isn't it? And Phil Buckingham started this, and we can blame him if it all goes pear-shaped at Villa Park this weekend and beyond. Not really. But he did the research. 27 games, 38 points this week in 2008. Okay, 10th place. 27 games, 39 points as we speak right now. 10th place. We talked about the comparison last time we did a podcast 2 weeks ago with 2008 because of the run of form we were showing around the turn of the year, over the festive period and into January and so on. But I'm not sure how seriously we were actually taking ourselves. Now suddenly all the stats by one solitary point on the board completely match what we were doing under Phil Brown 11 years ago. You can't help but notice it. You can't help but take it seriously.
You can't, because the stats are similar, but the circumstances are never going to be identical, are they? And I still don't want to get carried away, because I'm aware that we're really, really on the crest of a wave at the moment, and this form isn't sustainable, is it? We're not going to win every single game for the whole of the rest of the season, as much as I would be all right with that happening. So at some point,
the team has your approval.
I authorise City to win, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
But there's going to be quite a few occasions between now and the end of the season when they don't win. And we're still 4 points off, aren't we? So we've still got more to do. We're winning loads of games and we're still not in the playoffs, or even a single weekend's worth of results away from being in the playoffs. So
there's only one team outside the playoffs who have more points than us. I know that goal difference then comes into it, but there's only Bristol City outside that top 6. There's playoffs and promotion places who have more points than us. There's then Birmingham and Forest plus us and QPR all on 39. I mean, so again, with a continuation of this immense form and this good fortune that we're having this weekend when we go to Aston Villa, not only would we open a 4-point gap on Aston Villa, but it's entirely feasible we could be as high as 7th in the table.
Yeah,
and certainly 8th.
Well, there was a point on Saturday where we were 9th, and that felt a little bit ridiculous. As you might have noticed, whenever you look at when I've got a league table in front of me, I always do this like 3-point split. You know, what would happen if we had 3 points less? What would happen if we had 3 points more? And you know, you're in 7th place. You're knocking on the door of the playoffs. It can be done, but it's difficult to keep such a run going. I'd like to see that tested. Love to see it tried.
This is where you
used a phrase the other week about returning to the mean, and we don't quite know what that mean is, do we?
No,
we're as bad as we thought we were at the start of the season. I don't know if we're as good as we are as good as we are, because we're swatting side to side with relative ease.
But this is where you ask the question whether the cliche is true that footballers and football managers often say, which is that winning is a habit. It's very easy to go on a losing sequence, especially even when you're a good team. So if you are a good team, it's clearly Nigel Adkins has found a good team within the small sort of skeleton-like squad of players that he possesses, not many of whom he brought in himself. You've got to accept that winning must be some kind of habit as well, a habit that can continue. Yes, all good sequences come to an end, but so do all bad sequences. While we've got a good sequence, we want to try and maintain that positivity.
Cash in while you're hot, don't you? While we're winning games, let's not worry too much about too far ahead. Let's just think we've got Villa next, below us in the table, which is a a reversal of fortune. I think the guy set supporters could have envisaged even as little as 8 weeks ago.
I've got a comparison with 2008 for you, Andy, before we go any further, because somebody just said on Periscope, actually, this might be bad, but I don't want us to go up.
Well, we discussed this the other week, wasn't it? It's a proper ethical dilemma. You know, the sort of Kierkegaard might pose, where I'm loving City competing and you know, the frivolity of the idea of going up. But at the same time, do you want to go up to the Premier League with these owners? I think they'll be around for another 3 years.
But you said it. You said it on the Amber Nectar forums 11 years ago, when we'd never been up before to the Premier League, and you thought we might be better off waiting another year and having a much stronger squad. And you got absolutely slaughtered by older City fans for it, who'd been waiting forever for this opportunity. Do you think it's because we've had 2 spells in the Premier League already that somehow it's easier to account for the possibility of it not happening? I know that we've got moral and ethical reasons to not want to go up, because we don't want the Allams to stay and pocket all the Premier League money again. But purely from a footballing point of view, do you think there's more reason to have that view compared to 11 years ago, when we'd never experienced the Promised Land before, so to speak?
Well, it was the all-consuming thing, wasn't it, a dozen years ago, that we'd never played in the top flight. And now that we've had a few goes at it, and yeah, it's all right, isn't it? It's better than being in League 8, but it's not the be-all and end-all, isn't it? So then you can start to introduce other considerations, whereas 11 years ago we couldn't. We had to get promoted because we might never get this opportunity ever again.
Also, my desire to wait another year was predicated on greed, because I wanted us to win the fucking championship the next year.
That's a fair point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how many points are we off doing that?
Yeah, probably not
15.
But it was interesting what you were saying about you know, Adkins getting the best out of players that aren't his own. That's really fascinating, really.
He hasn't signed many, has he?
Because that takes some doing. But also the way he's turning around performances in players who at one point were pilloried. Nobody's questioning Henriksen anymore. Nobody.
No.
He isn't spoken about, and he's done that thing where he's just become consistently pretty good, and there's, you know, like an auto. If you're doing ratings, it's just like an automatic 7. But I mean, what was interesting against Sheffield Wednesday was Stewart getting man of the match.
What do you think of that?
I thought it was absolutely fascinating, because we've had a run of games where in each game a single player scored more than 1 goal. And normally with the people who vote for the man of the match, it's a goal scorer who's getting it. So for people to notice Stewart, who's been pilloried for quite a bit of his City career so far, and who is the kind of player that does the dirty work that a lot of people don't see, is that he plays the sort of destructor role. He's not the Kamil Grzycki or the Herefordshire Iron Robin bombing down the wing. He's sort of doing the nasty stuff in the middle. So for that to get noticed to the point where he was made a man of the match, I think that's quite remarkable.
It's interesting, isn't it, in a 3-0 win for a defensive midfielder to come out on top, when there were genuinely other very good performances. I think Henriksen was a solid 8. Bowen and Grzycki were always dangerous. So,
how defensive is Kevin Stewart when you consider that he's the one holding back, and Henriksen, who's always been regarded as that sort of ratting stalwart in the middle of the park, he's actually getting further forward.
Ratting stalwart, that's a beautiful expression. I think he's
a ratter.
You need one though. Well,
but it was Henriksen, and now it's Stewart. Henriksen's getting further forward. I mean,
I don't think it suited Henriksen, because he's showing his worth now, and I've said disobliging things about him before, and he's proven people like me wrong, and that's good. But I don't think ratting was his thing. Well, it's not, is it? but never mind.
Anyway,
so Stewart, he was unlucky when he got dropped after his very good performance against Norwich, wasn't he? And I'm glad that one single very good evening didn't prove to be the culmination of his season. I'm pleased that he was unlucky to be out of the side, but he's come back and done well again. So that's interesting, and it's interesting that we're not missing Irvine in the middle. I thought he was close to irreplaceable.
I think that's down to Ivandro, and I'm loving watching Ivandro, because, you know, we can win the ball and then just give it to him, and we might not lose it for a couple of minutes, because he's just orchestrating. You know, when Ivandro's got the ball, we tend not to lose it soon after. The ball after tends to be very clever and allows us to sort of stroke the ball about a bit and sort of probe the opposition's defence.
Shades of Robert Corran?
Quite possibly, just with a few less long range shots. But he's been absolutely phenomenal. You know, Nigel Adkins said he's the kind of player I'd pay to watch. I can fully get behind that comment. He's a Rolls Royce of a footballer.
There was always praise for Ivandro when he first came in under Marco Silva. You know, he was somebody who Marco Silva brought in quite quickly after he took over as our head coach. I suppose the fact that we're expressing surprise, not surprise, but joy that Ivandro's doing this, it comes with an element of surprise, I suppose, because he's had so long out with different sort of long pockets of time out with injury, hasn't he? And now we're seeing the best of him. And the fact that he played and Jackson Irvine was largely not missed, perhaps shows that there is a little bit of squad depth there, even though we're in a month now where that squad depth still needs to be replenished somewhat.
Yeah, it definitely does, because I still don't think we've got the squad to challenge, and we're only a couple of injuries away from it being over, aren't we, in terms of getting to the playoffs. But so all of a sudden, when everyone's on form, it does look a little happier, doesn't it? And you look at Evandro, I'm glad he orchestrates games, like because they were passing by, there was always, the touch was always there, and there was always a nice pass or the ability to drop a shoulder and beat a man. But you need more than flashes, don't you? If you're going to be trusted in midfield, you've got to, even in an advanced midfield role, you've got to do more than just do something every 5 or 6 minutes.
Well, it's metronomic at the moment, isn't it?
Metronomic.
And what I like, he talked about strength there, but I like the fact that, Milinkovic came on. We've seen nothing of that player. Barely knew he existed, but he came on and looked like somebody who was really trying to impress. And that moment, somebody put a video on where he was running across and a ridiculous slide at the end. But it's like, well, that's brilliant.
And then he gets back on and runs back again.
Somebody who's busting a gut for the team and to impress. So who knows about the strength in depth? If Adkins can keep imbuing confidence, I don't know what he's doing. I think he must be putting Prozac in the orange juice, but it's brilliant.
Talking of Adkins, he got the Manager of the Month award and then won 3-0, so that alleged curse didn't come true. Jared Bowen got the Player of the Month. He's now got 13 goals. He is. I think there's 2 players who've got 13. There's a couple who've got 15 and a few who've got 16. But he is essentially only a hat-trick behind the top scorer in the division, which is Tammy Abraham. It's a ripe time for him to leave. But I mean, we're in a dangerous month when it comes to keeping hold of our best players, of course, especially when you consider the antecedents of the people who either sign the cheques or sign the release contracts. But at the moment, we've got we're not just the division's form team, we have the division's form goal scorer as well. I mean, we've got it all at the moment.
Herefordshire Iron Robin.
I wanted to make sure I mentioned Jared Bowen by name because you've kept calling him the Herefordshire Iron Robin, and I just wanted to make sure that we knew exactly who you were talking about.
Do you know what I would have given? I didn't have a problem with Stewart getting the man of the match. I thought, that's good. I like the fact that people have noticed it. But I would have actually given it to Grzycki, and I'm often a bit of a critic of Grzycki because I sometimes think
You are very regularly a critic of Grzycki.
Well, he makes some really odd decisions, and that's probably the reason why he's at Hull City and not at Real Madrid. Because he, even in the game the other day, he had this thing where he had the times when he had every right to shoot, he didn't. He'd make like a bad pass, and another time you think, what are you shooting there for? But he's going for it so often, and he's bombing forward so often, and beating men so often that just by probability, he's going to do a couple of really good things a game. I mean, the cutting he did for Bowen's goal was actually quite tremendous, where he just sort of changed direction and took 3 Sheffield Wednesday players out of the game. One of them tried like a slide tackle behind him and looked quite stupid, and then fed the ball to Bowen. But we all see he had the presence of man to carry on, so that the defenders didn't know whether to go with him, and that gave Bowen just that extra little bit of time to sort of get it on his left foot and curl it round the keeper. Sex ball.
Indeed. What about Fraser Campbell's impact then? And his goal was tremendous, wasn't it? It was very individual. There was shades of 11 years ago in a way.
There was something a little unsophisticated about his finish, wasn't it? Which did to just involve kicking it real hard.
Well, Steve Wetherill said in his match report that the goalkeeper obligingly dived out of the way.
Yeah,
and just managed to deflect in off him on the way into the net. But sometimes the power will be enough, won't it?
Yeah, I suppose you would rather your striker tries to carefully place an opportunity like that rather than he boots it really hard. But
I think he'd used so much technique up on the original, flicking of the ball over. I think maybe it was getting reduced with it. Every time lightning strikes, it reduces the power of the storm. It was like every immaculate touch he did, the next one had to be a little bit more agricultural.
Did you enjoy the return of Hector?
More than he did.
Was George Boyd there as well?
He was, yeah.
He was there in body,
quite
wasn't he?
quite inconspicuous. Hector did all right in the first half, and then he stopped doing all right.
Yeah, whereas Boyd never did all right.
No.
I thought he was really... I appreciate he didn't get a lot of help, did he? But he just looked to...
He's veteran now stage, isn't he?
He
George
looked
Boyd.
in the veteran stage as well.
But there was a real listlessness to Sheffield Wednesday, wasn't there?
It's amusing, isn't it?
Yeah, beautiful.
Well, I mean, the negativity and the time-wasting tactic very early on of Sheffield Wednesday, you can't imagine that's come from Steve Bruce, can you? I know he doesn't start for another 2 weeks, but that doesn't mean, of course, he's got his assistants in there already. Agnew and Clements are there. So it's not as if they're not talking to him all the time about what the squad are up to, what training's like, what their shape's like, what injury situation's like, what the tactics are going to be for the weekend. You can't imagine Steve Bruce saying to Agnew and Clements, right, go to Hull, who are on absolute fire in form, and try and suppress them. It just doesn't sound like a very Bruce-like thing to do, and yet that's what they did.
Yeah, it's just all a bit cowardly, isn't it, in the Championship? There's not often a need to do it, I don't think, because everyone can beat everyone, and obviously I appreciate that Ipswich away to Leeds is going to be an incredibly tall order, but to the point where two mid-table sides, one needs to try and cancel the other out like that, I don't get it. And alright, Steve Bruce was perfectly capable of deploying hesitant tactics and caution where applicable, but this was weird. It just emboldened City. I'm absolutely sure of it.
Did Sheffield Wednesday just sling on a load of massive centre forwards with 20 minutes to go?
He was good, wasn't he?
Just one really massive centre forward.
Yeah, well, that's
John
why I
Parkin.
brought it up.
Yeah.
But John Parkin, as he presently is now, would have been...
As opposed to John
as
Parkin, the
effective.
footballer who was actually pretty good for the first 3 months at his time at City.
Yeah, whereas this Carlos for Sheffield Wednesday looked like he'd never really played football before. It was just weird, wasn't it? Oh, let's throw someone massive on, because that'll help, because we get lots of real good ball to him.
It's weird, you know, you look at the table, 10th in the table, we're above QPR, we're above Aston Villa, we're above Swansea, Blackburn, Stoke, Sheffield Wednesday and so on. I mean, you know, the number of teams, it's not, I mean, obviously, by definition, when you climb a lot of places in a table, you go past a lot of teams. But if you look back to when we were in the bottom three at the beginning of December, and you look at some of the teams who were above us then, who are now below us, you couldn't have believed in 1,000 years we'd get anywhere near them. You know, some of these big names and these teams that have had their spell of form and are now dropping down the table, one of whom is Aston Villa, who we go to this weekend. If we're going to keep this up, make it 7 wins in a row, 1 defeat in 14, a 10th win out of 14 and so on, assuming we go for the winner against Villa as opposed to not losing, we are going to have to go to the Championship's biggest stage and win. And we don't win at Villa Park. I don't know whether we ever have. We certainly didn't win on the few occasions we played them in the 70s and 80s as equals, and we didn't beat them there in the Premier League. In fact, I'm trying to remember, before Jared Bowen's goal on the opening day of last season, I'm trying to remember the last time we scored at Villa Park.
It's never been one of those places you travel to with any confidence, is it? But if you can't travel with a bit of heart when you've won 6 in a row, then you never will.
We drew there last season, opening day, didn't we? 1-1 draw.
We played all right there a couple of times, but we've never...
It's been more memorable for the things that have gone wrong, really. As
I've thrown out the Villa.
Yeah.
Things that have gone wrong, yeah. Well, that was a cup tie with 3 divisions difference, but I take your point. I mean, you think about the injury to Ashby in the first season and the injury to Bullard in the second season, for example, when we first got in the Premier League. But yeah, anyway, we've got to go to Villa Park if and do something extraordinary there if we're going to keep this run going.
I fear no foe, Matthew.
Do you really fear no foe?
I feel we could take anybody on at the moment. We drew with Norwich, you know, when they were top of the league. We beat Leeds on their own patch when they were top of the league.
Yeah.
If this run of form can continue a little bit longer, are Villa that much to worry about?
We're below us in the table, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That might not be a permanent situation, obviously, but at the moment, when things are going for you, I'd be surprised and a bit disappointed if we didn't go for the win. And if we lose, we lose. A defeat is probably coming at some point, but while things are going like this, why would the manager not simply say, well, just go try to do that again, lads, and if it didn't work, it didn't work. But let's go for it. We're not going to get relegated now, which was the fear that's haunted the season until really quite recently. So no, we've absolutely nothing to lose.
Do you envisage much in terms of changes in the personnel? Let's assume nobody gets sold and nobody's injured before Saturday. Do you envisage the team being the same starting 11?
Probably, yeah. We're not blessed with options. You could maybe make an argument for Campbell coming in if he's fit.
What about Irvine? Is he
I don't think he's back anywhere. But even
Right.
if he is, he's coming from the other side of the world, having played a crop of internationals, and there's not a pressing need for it, is there? So it would be unless anyone's carrying an injury or a knock or anything like that. Other than that, I would just say crack on, lads.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Will Keane's gone to Ipswich. He scored at the weekend, which was quite nice to see.
He only scores goals for different clubs in a season, have you noticed?
So is that it for him this season?
Yeah. It's the only goal he'll ever score for Ipswich.
And there was always something quite endearing about Will Keane, don't you think?
His man bun.
I wasn't going to refer to that now. I was thinking, when we went to Rotherham this season and we were protecting that well, it was a 3-1 lead when he came on. We were protecting that lead, and Adkins stuck Will Keane on. Of course, in theory, he is a centre forward, but he's like a sort of a budget Olivier Giroud in that he's a centre forward who's not either expected or asked to try to score goals. And he went to the corner flag on numerous occasions and just kept the ball and kept kicking it against defenders' shins and winning cheap corners and cheap throw-ins and wasting time. But the thing is, I get the impression that's what he'd be asked to do if he started matches as well. Not that he ever started that many.
We'll always have Burton Albion though, won't we?
And he was good. He was great there.
He scored.
And absolutely, he scored. He's gone.
He looked angelic in white.
And beyond any concerns about the future of Bowen and of Grzycki, it looks like Nuadiko's on his way out. Let's assume he's going, and by the time we speak again next week after the Aston Villa game, let's assume he's gone. Has it been a case because Dicko came having played against us last season for the ultimate champions in Wolves? It's been a frustrating year for him, really, hasn't it, at Hull City? Because he looked like he had the potential to become a good line leader, but he never really got the run of games he needed. I still think
he has, but he's always been deployed as the lone furrow plower, isn't it? And that's not really anything to do with him.
He's like a firefighter, a sort of Red Adair type who comes on to keep the ball up front rather than be a little bit more of a traditional centre forward aimed at scoring. I mean, he scored his first goal recently, didn't he, in the mauling of Bolton Wanderers? But again, he only gets a chance to score a goal because he's come on as a sub in a game that's long won and against a side that are clearly dispirited and dishevelled by it all.
I suppose perhaps the frustrating thing is he didn't quite impress at Miwwaww as much as he could have done. He had an opportunity to really stake his place. Having said that, he set up a goal, so all was not lost. Interesting.
Okay. You mentioned Millwall there, so let's go back a week. We didn't bother with a podcast last week. We figured that a 2-1 defeat to Millwall in the FA Cup wasn't worth our time or yours, frankly, and I still think it's worth very little time of this podcast. I suspect these two guys agree with me. It brought the sequence of wins and indeed unbeaten games to an end, but not necessarily a crushing or indeed crashing end, because it was the FA Cup and when you go out the FA Cup in the third round when you're a club like Hull City in its current situation, there'll be plenty who see it as a blessing as much as a frustration. A cup run would have been lovely, although last year's cup run ultimately ended up with us being absolutely destroyed against Chelsea on a Friday night, to the extent that Les started playing FIFA instead. So maybe
what crushed me though was the sight of John Terrell cleanly shaven. I didn't like that. It was fine beard before that.
It was a defeat, but it was an irrelevant defeat, wasn't it?
It was a defeat of, you could argue, lesser consequence than a league defeat, but it's a defeat. And when you're in mid-table, that always strikes me as the best time to go for the FA Cup. When you've not got anything, you've got relatively little chance of swapping divisions, then the cup should, in my opinion anyway, and I'm not supported by Nigel Adkins on this, but that's when I think you've got more scope to give it a go. If City were third, or indeed
third bottom,
yeah, then clearly the league comes above all. But when you're mid-table, I don't. It's the way the FA Cup's gone, and I've been prattling about this for a decade and more, and it's not going to change, is it?
I felt the starting 11 was a good mix of giving the kids a chance, playing players who spent quite a bit of time injured, and also giving players on the periphery a bit of a go. And even though City didn't really look the better side, for a long time it looked like we were going to win that. They chucked a sub on, and he scored 2 splendid goals. Frustrating, but I felt that the side we put out was competitive.
It was competitive,
and I actually quite enjoyed George Long's performance in goal. He looked quite commanding, really, didn't he? difficult to fault him for any of the goals, really. Was it Wilkinson? He looked. Was it Wilkinson? He looked quite composed in defence. Probably got his name wrong.
Is it not frustrating though if a relatively fringe side can almost win? Our first team would have won that and we'd be in the 4th round.
Would you have wanted...
We would now be playing Everton instead of a league game against Blackburn Rovers.
Would you have wanted Grzycki playing in that game or Bowen in that game? Or would you have...
Yeah, why not? Especially if I'd gone. I couldn't be asked as it happened. But yeah, if I'd gone, I would definitely want them to have played.
Sorry, I meant the Herefordshire Rob.
Okay. So, anyway, Miwwaww have got Everton in the 4th round of the FA Cup. We're supposed to play Blackburn that weekend. Just want to say there will be no podcast next week if Blackburn win their replay tomorrow night against Newcastle United, because we won't have a match if they win that replay, because they'll be playing in their 4th round FA Cup tie instead.
Good research, that, man.
It is, and we'll be able to tell you for definite, hopefully. Well, no, we won't be able to tell you for definite tomorrow because the podcast will be over before that match is over. But we are here tomorrow. The 200th edition of the Amber Nectar podcast has somehow made it to us. Now, what did we do? The 100th we brought in Dave Burns. The 150th we got Phil Buckingham. So for the 200th, we've decided not to bother with the local media, and we've gone straight for the Ex-Tigers Association and the former captain not only of Hull City but crucially the Hull City Soccer Sevens team that appeared on Sky Sports a few years ago.
We've got his shirts from those.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You can wear one. Justin Whittle.
Might look like a condom on a dash hunt.
I can't even begin to compute that image, to be honest. Justin Whittle is joining us tomorrow. Serious hero, certainly, of this guy here and this guy here, for that matter.
Why do you hate him?
Anyway, the Great Escape season, we're talking about the first Premier League season from 10 years ago, but the Great Escape season, of which he played obviously a massive part after he joined during that season, was 20 years ago. Completely different world, completely different era for Hull City. But of course, many supporters watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, were around watching City back then as well. So it will be an interesting retrospective that we will do with Justin Whittle and these two tomorrow evening on the podcast. Usual time, or roughly the usual time. Keep an eye on Twitter for when we get going. And he will be here tomorrow to talk to us about his memories of that. And these two have got plenty of memories of it.
Right.
Indeed, looking forward to that. It's January. There's been a statement. And as you put, so I love, it's one of my favourite things you put on Think this morning, Andy. Club statements, don't you just love them? Haven't you missed them?
I always used to enjoy the 4 PM ones on a Friday, though, when Arsenal Allen was saying something particularly stupid, and they'd wait till the very end of the week to maximise the irritation over the weekend. Well, so this one just popped out at random during the week.
It did. There is a fear amongst the vast majority who want the Allams out, that the Allams once again are smelling the money associated with success, and therefore takeover talk, and indeed takeovers, have been shelved, basically, because they're suddenly realising that there's the opportunity for them to have a new nest to feather as a consequence of the team and the manager doing well. What's your view on that?
Well, it's a good job they're better at selling marine generators than football clubs, isn't it? Because they're conspicuously shit at selling football clubs. That's my take on that.
That's your take on that. Les, anything to add? Les is shaking his head for those of you listening purely in audio form.
Indeed. Good
visual stuff for our ears only listeners. Thank you for that, Les. So I don't know. I mean, it's happening in January, of course. Our run of form is happening in coinciding with the point where you can actually buy and sell players. So the Allams are obviously going to be around and about more than they are usually during the season, because it's a business point of the season. Can you see a reason why they issued that statement? Because there's been no business done.
No, there's been no business done, and I think a lot of it does genuinely come down to, particularly Ehab's wish for a bit of attention.
Do you think he wants to try and muscle in on Nigel Adkins' success? We appointed him after all.
Yeah, possibly. Possibly.
There is a history, not just at City, of owners and chairmen wanting their share of the glory, because they're the ones who've appointed and bankrolled managers and players and so on to achieve the success that they did. But of course, they don't necessarily want the blame when the managers they've appointed who've signed crap players have then failed.
No, we didn't hear much from him in November when we were in the relegation places, did we?
Les is still just shaking his head. So I don't think
the Marcel Marceau podcast.
When you do spaghetti, you did that very well. Okay, all right. So 10 years ago then, 2008-2009 season. We get into January. We're on a bit of a bad run, having lost 3 in a row to Sunderland and then to Manchester City, famously on Boxing Day, and then to Aston Villa. We get into 2009, the new year, and the first game of the new calendar year was actually the FA Cup third round tie. We'd been drawn at home to Newcastle, who had already beaten at St James's Park in the league that season. It wasn't the worst draw in the world, especially as it was at home, although it felt weird not having a New Year game and going straight to Saturday the 3rd of January and playing an FA Cup tie. I mean, there's not a lot to really remember from that. It was a goalless draw. There's one or two things about the team. For example, Matt Duke finally getting a chance. This wasn't a Premier League game, of course, but finally getting the chance on a slightly bigger stage against slightly bigger opponents.
The only thing I can remember about this game is that Newcastle fans managed to pull down an advertising hoarding at the front of the stand and pass it among themselves for a bit, which suggests that maybe the football wasn't that riveting after all.
You're probably right.
Well, Newcastle looked like they didn't want to be there, didn't they? They looked like they were playing for a 0-0 draw from quite early on, which was a little bit odd. What I take from it as somebody who's over-obsessed with professional athletes' clothing, this was the first game we noticed that when it was a cup game, City wore black dress shirts before the game, and you know.
Well, Phil Brown did on the touchline, didn't he?
Phil Brown, which might have explained some of his moods in certain cup ties when he.
Did he also wear that sort of Aztec-like scarf on the touchline with his suits for cup ties?
In this game, didn't he have that bizarre flight jacket on? Like what George Bush wore on that flight. Anyway,
this was the only game I missed that season, so I can't really comment. It was a good one to miss. I was in Middlesbrough that day, unfortunately.
There were pretty strong sides that both teams put out, weren't they?
Yeah.
You look at ours, and there were not. Obviously, the keeper was changed, but then
there was Duke, Stelios, and Doyle were probably the only peripheral players, right?
Yeah, but Newcastle that was pretty much their first team at the
time.
time.
There was even room for Nicky Featherstone on the bench for City. Not that he got anywhere near the pitch, and Ryan France for that matter. I mean, Ryan France had done 3 divisions with us, one of the 4 who'd done 3 promotions, but hadn't got a sniff of the first team at all at this point of the season. Newcastle, they had Nicky Butt and Michael Owen in the side who'd been to a couple of World Cups between them. And also Andy Carroll, I think was about 19 or something at the time, hadn't grown his hair, and we'd been linked with him, I think, in the summer. I think because Phil Brown, because Sam Allardyce was still in charge of Newcastle, wasn't he? And Phil Brown had been linked with Carroll because of his connections with Allardyce. We'll go straight to the replay then, even though there's a league game in between.
Ooh,
because the replay, by comparison to the first game, was an incredibly memorable occasion, even though it only finished in a single goal victory for City. What do we want to talk about? Do we want to talk about City? I mean, Les will surely want to talk about City digging out that last season's kit for this one.
Yeah. It was strange that for a cup tie we put Premier League patches on a kit we was only going to wear that once. That was a little bit odd, but I loved that away kit. It's one of my favourite away kits ever, so see it get pulled out of the Sport Pezzer of Kits for Africa box, which obviously didn't exist then. But Ryan France did play in that game, didn't he?
He did. He started it, and so did Doyle again.
But again, you got the feeling that Newcastle didn't really want to be there, whereas City looked fairly up for this, didn't they? I thought.
Yeah, City played really well, actually. It was a late goal, and obviously winning 1-0 away from home with a late goal was a thoroughly enjoyable thing to happen, but we probably should have scored a few earlier on. It wasn't a streaky win, as I remember, and it gave us the opportunity to win at Newcastle for a second time in a season, which was no bad thing.
Indeed.
I still think the highlight of the game, though, is what Wu-Tang Clan would refer to as a ruckus, when our manager and their manager, their Heart Attack Jack, decided to go for a bit of touchline rutting. Forehead rutting.
Indeed. And Joe Kinnear had never managed Newcastle again, did he? Because he had a heart attack that day. It was only a mild one, as far as I remember. He wasn't in any. He wasn't in a serious condition afterwards, but it was enough to render him unable to continue with the job. I was going to say I got that wrong about Sam Allardyce, didn't I? Because it was Keegan who'd been there that season. I don't know why I mentioned Allardyce. Was that the year after? When no, hang on a minute. What am I? No, I'm starting to get confused here. I thought when Shearer came in, it was because Allardyce had gone, but maybe that was the previous season.
No, Shearer came in at the end of the season. They got relegated in.
Which was this season?
Doesn't Joe Kinnear? It was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Joe Kinnear sound like someone who should have been finishing managing about 25 years ago, not a mere 10 or 11.
Or if he was still managing 10 years ago, it should have been, Wycombe Wanderers.
Yeah, maybe a semi-retirement job somewhere like Hereford.
Wasn't Daniel Kuzan? Wasn't Daniel? Yeah,
Phil Brown retired him that night.
Wasn't Daniel Kuzan's goal a delightful finish as well?
It was, yeah. And it come from a bit of Mendy mayhem, didn't it? We hadn't seen any of that in a little while.
Mendy mayhem.
But he went on he sort of like just ran, cut inside and ran at like 2 players. And he had a shot that deflected to Garcia. Garcia centred it, and Kuzan with a smart finish.
It was indeed.
Awesome.
So we won 1-0, and we knew we were going to play Millwall at home next. Millwall in the FA Cup, that won't catch on. It was also, I do believe, this might have been the cup tie when I don't know how much of a tradition it became. We certainly did it for a few years afterwards. The singing of retro songs, because I think we had a spell in the second half. Because of course you're in that vertigo-inducing away end at Newcastle, and when the game's rubbish. Which it was for a spell in the second half. You need to keep yourself warm and occupied because
hypoxia sets in.
I'm pretty certain our friend Cropper was heavily involved in this, going on about singing on about Gary Alexander and Theo Whitmore and Rodney Rowe and Kevin Francis and all that era of player, and it just caught on. And we did genuinely do this for cup ties for a while to come, didn't we?
Yeah, it's probably quite fitting, really. The FA Cup survives purely on its own nostalgia for a better earlier time, so you can understand why City fans did the same, really. And
City getting into the 4th round of the FA Cup was a novelty in itself.
Yeah, first time in 20 years, wasn't it?
Yeah, so since the run to the Liverpool game in '89. Of course, we would end up in the 6th round, and which we've not done since 1971. So we've got plenty of FA Cup chat on this podcast later on in the season.
Red hot FA Cup chat
as we go through the calendar. So let's go to the league game that happened in between those 2 cup ties. We lost 2-0 at Everton. This is where Elbows Fellaini was at his baddest. He really got Michael Turner a couple of times in the build-up to his goal early in that game. There was a lot of talk about it and a lot of close-up sort of replays and different angles and so on. Match of the day, asking the question: how on earth did the referee not even spot it, let alone do anything about it? I mean, he could have had Turner's throat out. The viciousness with which he was doing this, it was crazy.
It wasn't the only thing that messed with Fellaini, because Fellaini was clearly offside for the first goal, wasn't it? Now City didn't play well at all that game and never really looked a part of it. I think we barely had a shot on goal. But yeah, when Sideshow Bob's allowed to elbow your defenders and be offside with impunity, it's not going to go well. But City showed a remarkable lack of ambition that night. Really just didn't. I think we attempted to attack on the counter, and as soon as Fellaini scored, that went out the window, and we just sort of huffed and puffed and did very little. And did Arteta get one just on half time? Arteta had a good game. I remember being genuinely impressed by him.
Yeah, he was a good player. He always was a good player, and got that move to Arsenal later on, didn't he?
We were never in that, were we? Never.
No.
I appreciate there's arguably mitigating factors like the offside goal and Fellaini being allowed to do what Fellaini does, but I thought we looked really like we actually looked like a championship side playing out of its depth that day.
Well, I felt if we'd have showed the effort we showed at Newcastle, we might have potentially got something out of it.
Somebody's just said it was the game that made him hate Fellaini forever. It's the game that made me hate Tim Cahill forever, because my abiding memory of this game was Cahill going in on it with his studs into Bose Myhill's chest when the ball was too far ahead of Cahill. Myhill came out and laid down on his side in order to collect the ball and grasp it, and Cahill just went straight through him with his studs, even though the ball was going to be nowhere near his boot at the point of contact, and he got booked for it. And Myhill was hurt, and he was down for a good couple of minutes or so, and it was vile. It really was. I mean, you wonder why they're not going to gain anything from it. And it was in the second half when Everton were already 2-0 up. You wonder why footballers do that to each other. You know, they all vote for each other as wonderful players with PFA awards at the end of the season. And there's one thing about being good rivals, but this was just vicious. You find it hard to believe that they actually do that to each other when they know they've got no. It's not going to cause them any great advantage, especially when you're already 2-0 up. And I've hated Tim Cahill ever since for that reason.
Before on, since he was never really a player you would think would be prone to that kind of thing, maybe a little bit hot-headed at times, but that, you know, it was pretty awful, wasn't it? But it's the pointlessness of it. It wasn't 0-0, and he was feeling the need to clatter the keeper, Whitehurst 87 style. It was just all a bit pointless, really. What were Fellaini and Cahill thinking was necessary from it all afternoon long? City were pretty poo. They were going to win no matter what. I did enjoy Everton Stadium though. It's not the first time I've been to it, but I've always liked.
First time you actually saw the game, given your viewpoint.
I'm trying to remember where we were. I was in the lower Bullens, and it was like watching it through a letterbox.
I quite like that though. It's a bit different to. I enjoyed my limited view of that game, certainly.
Is that like watching a horror film through your fingers? Watching City not compete at Everton through a letterbox?
Next time we go to Everton, we take a settee with us and just hide behind it while we're watching the match.